But every time I hear that gospel and I hear about Peter and the other disciple who ran faster than him, I think, story of my life. Every time. So there's this show, it's called The Man in the High Castle. I think many of you have probably seen it. I have not. You're probably thinking, how is he going to talk about it then? Well, I discovered it recently. All I've seen is one clip from the very first episode. And for those of you who don't know, this show is it's a what-if scenario. So what if the U.S. lost in World War II? So the U.S. becomes occupied territory for Germany and for Japan. And one of the opening scenes of the show is with this young lady. Her name is Juliana. And Juliana receives a video from her sister, and she puts the video in and she begins to watch it. Now, the interesting thing for you as the viewer is you cannot see the video. All you can see is her reaction. So as she's watching this video, you see her go from this look of despair to eventually a smile, to a laugh, and by the end of it, you see hope. And the movie ends, and so she watches it again, and again, and again. And the whole time, you can't see what she's watching, but you see this woman being filled with hope. Well, eventually, finally, her boyfriend comes into the room, and she looks at him and she says, "Have you seen this? It says we won the war." And he says to her, "But we lost." And she said, "Yeah, that's what they told us. That's what they told us." It's a very thought-provoking scene, and it just made me think, I wonder how many people have been told the wrong story when it comes to our Christian faith. How many people are out there believing the wrong narrative and don't truly understand the story of God's love for you and me? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through the story of God's love because it's imperative that we understand the real story, not the false narrative that I think many of us sometimes believe. And I'm going to do that through 3 questions. The first question is this. It's very simple. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why are we here? And the answer is also very simple. It's because God is totally good, all loving, and because of his goodness and his love, he has created everything. And he's done so in such a way to reveal himself to us. We're supposed to see God's goodness through everything he has created, through creation. You think of a beautiful sunset. That should reveal God's presence just by that, the beauty of God's creation alone. And not only has God revealed and manifested himself through the fingerprints of the world, he's done so by creating us out of love and for love. God created us so that we would know and be loved by him, and so that we would also know and love him. That's why there is something rather than nothing. That's why we're here. I think it's the only logical answer as well. To me, there's no other reason for how this beautiful world exists without a loving creator. But then the second question is very important, because it's why we're here today. And the second question is this: why is everything so messed up? Why is everything so messed up? Think about it. I probably don't have to convince you that the world is messed up. I'm sure all of you are thinking of your different examples, but let me just throw out a few. We just had tornadoes last week in this country that killed several people in the South, Midwest. We have people who die too soon. This very parish We had 2 funerals this past week of people that really went away too soon. We have gun violence, where people die in shootings, for no apparent reason. Obviously, there's disease and all these other things. And it's not just that. There's real evil in this world. So what's the answer to why is everything messed up? Well, because evil exists and because Satan exists. Let me be very clear. There's a strand of Christianity that wants to deny that Satan is real. But if that is the case, this celebration is meaningless because we're celebrating today a victory. That means Jesus is victorious over someone. And if there is no Satan, that means there is no victory. And there is a victory. Why is everything messed up? Because evil, sin, and Satan are real. And we all need a Savior. And the third question then, the one I'm going to spend my most time on, which again is why we're here today. So what has God done about it? What has God done about this world that seems to be broken and messed up? And I'm going to answer this in 3 parts. I could certainly do 7 or 8, but I think y'all want to get to Easter brunch, so we're only doing 3. So the first way in which God responds to how this world is messed up and needs him is very simple. It's this: God sent his Son. God sent his Son. God sent his Son into this world to seek and to find all that was lost and to bring us home. What's a great example of this? It's one of my favorite movies, Finding Nemo. If you haven't seen it, you're living under a rock, you know? This gentleman at the last mass said, "Father, I haven't seen it yet. I guess I'm under a rock." I said, "Yeah, watch it today. Come on. You got grandkids. Let's go." One of the best movies of all time. But why is it such a beautiful movie? Because you have Marlin, who's the father, and you have Nemo, the son. And what happens is Nemo gets lost, he eventually gets caught, he gets put in a fish tank in a dentist office of all places. And Marlin loves his son. And now the interesting fact about Marlin is he hates adventure. He hates risk. And he doesn't like leaving home. So when his son is lost, what does Marlin do? He's willing to traverse the entire ocean to find his son. My friends, our God was willing to traverse the gap between divinity and humanity to find us, those who are lost, and to bring us home. Home with our God. That's home for us. So that's the first way in which God responds, by sending his Son to seek and to find that which is lost. What's the second way? Well, the second comes from another great movie I do not recommend for children, Gran Torino. Yeah, this is a great movie. Very vulgar. So if you watch it, don't judge me too harshly, but very good movie. But again, for those who haven't seen it, it's a Clint Eastwood movie. And so Clint Eastwood plays this character. His name is Walt. He's an old, grumpy white man. I'm sure that surprises all of you when it comes to Clint Eastwood. And so Walt, it lives in this neighborhood, and all of his neighbors eventually have moved away, and in moves an Asian family next to his house. It's the Parish, his house. And in the beginning of the movie, there's some racial tension between Walt and this family. But as the movie goes on and the story unfolds, Walt begins to fall in love with this family. And he develops a very beautiful grandfather-like relationship with 2 of the children, the son and the daughter in the movie. And the daughter is about 17. And what happens eventually is the daughter gets severely beaten by a gang. And Walt is livid and angry. And he wants to go after this gang. And so that's what he does. And the interesting thing about it is everyone thinks that Walt is going to go do this violent thing, but he doesn't. What does he do instead? He goes to the hangout for the gang. He gets their attention. They all come outside and they look at him, and Walt does something very simple. He makes a quick gesture into his coat pocket, and he pulls out a lighter. Now, they thought he was pulling out a weapon. So what did they do? They killed him. Now, why is this an image of Christ? Because this is what Jesus has done for us this weekend. What did Walt do? He went and he took on all of the violence from this gang. He took it all upon himself so that this young woman would never have to experience it again. And not only that, by taking on that violence from the gang himself, he made sure that they would go to prison for life, so this young woman could live with freedom and peace. What is it that Jesus has done for us this weekend? He has literally taken on all the attack of the enemy, all of the violence from the evil one, so that we don't have to, so that we can be free. And this is what St. Paul says, he who knew no sin became sin. That's what St. Paul means. He literally took on all of the effects of sin so that he could set us free and to heal us. That's the warrior that we were waiting for. But notice he did it in a non-violent way. He didn't take revenge. He received it and set us free. And the third way in which God responds is that Jesus took on our human flesh as his Trojan horse. You might be thinking, what do you mean by that, Father? Well, one of the early church fathers mentions and says to us that God needed a body so that he could die. Now that might sound obvious, but let that sink in for a moment. God needed a human body so that he could die. Why? Because he needed a way into hell, into the realm of the dead. What does a Trojan horse do? Well, you think about the Greeks. They built this Trojan horse. They all hide in it. They give it to Troy so they can attack and surprise them and defeat the enemy in secret. What has Jesus done by his death? It's beautifully portrayed in the Passion of the Christ, which I watch every Good Friday. If you haven't seen it, it's really well done. I do not recommend it for entertainment, but just to watch, to remind ourselves of Christ's sacrifice. But at the scene where Christ is crucified, he's on the cross and he bows his head and he dies. Now you would think in this moment that Satan would be elated. But the very next scene, right after Christ dies, we see hell and we see Satan. And what's going on is he is going berserk. He's angry. Why? Because if you remember that scene in the Passion, Satan in hell is angry because everything around him are tombs and graves, and they're empty. Because at the moment of Christ's death, he was able to enter into hell and to free and to bring back to life all those who had died before him. And if you doubt me on this, let me just remind you from the Gospel of Matthew, which we heard last Sunday. Jesus cried out again in a loud voice and gave up his spirit. He died, and behold, the veil of the sanctuary is torn in two from top to bottom. The earth quaked, rocks were split, tombs were opened, and the bodies of many saints who had fallen asleep were raised. At the moment of Christ's death, he has gone into Satan's home, he has deceived the deceiver, and he has won. That's awesome. That's what we're here today to celebrate. Because Jesus has power over death and rose to new life. It's interesting, I've been listening a lot to Father John Riccardo, and he's becoming a big speaker in the Catholic Church in the U.S., and if you're not familiar with him, I encourage you to look him up, but I was listening to him speak, and he was talking about this experience he had with this young lady who wanted to talk to him about her life. And she called Father John, and she said, "Father, my life is messed up. and I would like to meet with you and to talk with you." He said, "Sure, come on in." So they started to talk, and eventually he says to her, "Before we say anything, before we have a conversation about anything, I want to go over the story of God's love. Because unless you and I have the same understanding of God's love and how it has unfolded over time in history, nothing I'm going to say to you is going to make sense. Nothing." And so that's what he does. He tells her this story, and he uses the same 3 questions that I used with you today, the very same. And when he got done telling the story, this young woman was sobbing. And she said, "Father, I never heard that story before. That's not the God that I was taught. That's not the story that I was told." See, my fear is, brothers and sisters, that there are many of us like this, that there are many people out there who have been told the wrong Christian story. See, this young woman, here's the story that she was told. She was told, if you are good and you go to church, God will love and bless you. And if you're bad and you don't go to church, God will condemn you. Well, that's not a great story. And if that's the story you've heard, it's the wrong one. It's just like the woman and the man in the high castle. My hope is that if that is the story you've heard, you're hearing a different one for the first time, and it's giving you hope today. Because the real story, my friends, is that God loved us and created everything out of his love for us and wants us to live in that relationship with him forever. The real story is that things are messed up because of evil and sin, because of the evil one. And God never gave up on us. And he wanted to heal us. And so what did he do? He sent his son to bring us back, to heal us, to save us, and to take on all of the attack of the enemy so we wouldn't have to. This is the real story of God's love for you and me. It's what we celebrate today. So my prayer for you and me is that we are all filled with Easter courage. That as we go out and we see our friends and we see our family, if we hear them talking about the story of God's love that isn't the one that you've heard, the one that you've heard today, that we have the courage to say, "Let me tell you a different story, a story that will change your life." It will change your life. Because the story of God's love is the real story. It's the story that saves.